The title of this message is The Real Hell is Hotter Than the False One of Dante's Inferno. I think it would be good for us to just, for a little bit, think about the real hellfire and also better understand the false one, because there are things we need to understand. I no longer believe that, if ministers talk about hellfire, brother, you better get converted or you're going to burn and be tortured forever and ever. I actually don't think that motivates people to get converted. And I'm giving you an opinion, of course. It motivate some, but a lot of them, it's sort of like when they accused Judge Kavanaugh of leading serial rape gang, and I don't go into the details of what they said. People said, wait a minute. This guy's been on this high court for 13 years, had 6 FBI investigations, and no evidence of that ever came up. They said, wait a minute, that's so outrageous, so over the top, that almost it just killed a lot of the negatives against him. Because, and I know it's the porn lawyer who brought a lot of those people up, but maybe not all of them up. But in other words, when you push it over the top, people, you lose all credibility. And that's what I think Dante's Inferno about people being tortured forever and ever. Like one man said in his sermon, he says, a bird with a little beak chiseling at a giant mountain, maybe he'll only make 20 feet in 10,000 years. That's only one day of eternity. And you're going to be suffering for that, for all the, that's so over the top that I think it's a little too much. Well, let's look at what the Bible means by hell. There are 3 Greek words, 3 that are translated hell. One is Hades, and it simply means a grave. Like you dig a 6-foot grave and put a casket in, that's Hades. You're in the ground, and people used to put potatoes in Hades years ago so they wouldn't spoil so fast in a bag or something like that. Second is Tartaru. It's a condition of restraint, and it's only used for demons. And the scriptures used in 2 Peter 2:4. 2 Peter 2 reads, "For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell," Tartaru is the Greek word, "He delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment." Well, they're kind of locked up there, and that's their judgment in this bottomless pit. And the third word, this is the most important one, Gehenna. This is it's a little broader meaning, but Gehenna, the valley of Gehenna was the garbage dump for the city of Jerusalem, in the days in which the New Testament was written, and before that too. And what they did was, they had this big, I like to think of it like a depression landfill, where you throw all your garbage and bodies of vagrants and others that they didn't have anybody to bury. They throw them in there and they would burn it. That's a good way of getting rid of garbage. So there was, almost all the time there was a fire there. And you know the expression that worm dieth not? It's not that they're immortal worms, as it said in the booklet that you probably have read already. It's just that any day you went by there, there's enough garbage, filth, and dead bodies. There'd always be a few maggots and worms around. I mean, that's the way those things go. So it's a continuous fire of burning garbage. And so Christ referenced that word Gehenna, and he connects it with the lake of fire. So that third word hell means Gehenna fire, or lake of fire, or garbage of fire. And in some ways, the unsaved are, in many Bible parables, looked at as trash that gets burned up. And you'll see that in the Bible as well. And that's the hell that we must fear, the lake of fire. It doesn't just torture people forever and ever, which, by the way, is unbiblical when you view everything in context, but it will burn you up to ashes. You'll be consumed, and fairly quickly. It'd be like if you were to go to an active volcano, and all that, I call it a lake of fire, lava that's down there, and you jumped in. My guess is you'd probably be terrified for about 8 seconds while you screamed and said, "What stupid thing am I doing?" Actually, they say people who've jumped off bridges to commit suicide, the moment they jump, they change their minds. What a dumb thing I've done. Because some hit the water and somehow survived. And they tell people that's how they felt like, no matter what was depressing me, jumping off this bridge to kill myself wasn't worth it. So I imagine when if you were to jump in the volcano, you would probably be burned to a crisp before you even hit the fire. But if not, just like that, you'd be gone. Well, that'll happen to the unsaved. Now, I from some other scriptures, I perceive that God will give them a few minutes to see the lake of fire approaching them, so they will know, because God likes things to be wrapped up in a neat package. They'll know why they were defiant sinners, or sinners who didn't care about the sacrifice of Christ. And maybe they had other bad things, there are a list of them in the Bible. They'll realize why they're facing the lake of fire. And then they'll be gone. And the way that's really kind, because think about it, if you were a defiantly evil person, and there are some people that are really evil. I don't mean they're just weak and they've got problems. That's a whole nother issue. They're really evil. You could probably think of Joseph Stalin, killed 20 million of his own people. Not talking about war, just gulags and all that horrible stuff that he did to the kulaks and others. Hitler and Dr. Mengele. We could probably rattle off a whole list of others you throw in that category. They are perverted and evil, sadist, and it is likely that people like them will deserve to have their life ended, because if they live, they would just cause trouble for themselves and others for all eternity. So actually God is doing the right thing. That's the hellfire we have to worry about, because we face a greater challenge being converted in this age. Those who are going to be converted in the age to come, God's Holy Spirit will be everywhere. It'll be easy, relatively easy. I mean, they'll have to resist their human nature. It'll be relatively easy. It's going to be harder for us. So we're under more risk, but we get a much higher position. But I don't believe God would have called us now. He recognized something in us that we can do it, with His help and His grace, of course. And you have to believe that. So basically, when that lake of fire comes, the real Gehenna fire, all non-spirit beings will be turned to ashes. And by the way, when you go to 1 Corinthians 15:50, it talks about how death and the grave are ended. They just don't exist anymore. We all get immortal life. Well, that will happen, but we don't have immortal life now. Let's remember that. You don't have immortality now. Malachi 4:3 says, to the righteous, you shall trample the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day that I do this, says the Lord. And they will be ashes someday. Revelation 20:12, I saw the dead, great and small, stand before the throne, and the books means Bible, were open. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of the things written in the Bible, the books, according to their works. And of course, they got their name written in the book of life. And as we said at the feast, many people who have good, humble backgrounds will probably get their names written in the book of life fairly quickly, and others will have a lot more to overcome. But the majority will get written in that book of life. And the sea gave up the dead, and dead were in it. And the death and Hades, that means death and the grave, gave up the dead that were in them. And they were judged each according to their works. I mean, they'll have to learn the Bible and follow along. And God will be there to help, and His Holy Spirit will be there. And death and Hades, or the grave, were cast in the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. In other words, when we're resurrected, when Christ returns, we'll have most of us suffered only the first death. But we will never have to fear the second death. But some people who are the incorrigibly wicked, they'll be resurrected and they'll face the second death, and that'll be the end for them. So the defiant sinners will face the second death because they didn't appreciate the wonderful sacrifice of Christ. Now, none of us should see the second death, only the unsaved. Isaiah 11:9. This is the verse I referred to a minute ago. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountains. This is the future, the great judgment period that's yet to come. For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of Jehovah, as waters cover the sea. Can you imagine a world where you don't have to say, do you know the Lord, brother? Because it'd be like water in the bottom of the ocean. God's Spirit will be poured on, I assume, billions of people in a little while, and everyone will know God. Everyone will be trying to get converted. Wow, what a fabulous world it'll be, and Satan will be locked up. It'll be wonderful. And then it just talks about the root of Jesse, which is Jesus Christ, will be there to help save everybody. That'll be a wonderful period. But we are in a more dangerous age. We run a higher risk. God knew that we could do it. That's why he called us. But we do have to worry about falling away. Now, this is an old corny joke, but I like it for the context. It's called near-death experience. Near-death experience. A middle-aged woman had a heart attack and was taken to the hospital. While on the operating table, she had a near-death experience. She saw God and asked, "Is my time up?" "No," God said, "you have another 40 years, 2 months, and 8 days to live." She said, "Wow, that's wonderful." Upon recovery, the woman decided to stay in the hospital. She talked to a plastic surgeon. She had a facelift, liposuction, tummy tuck, even had her lips pulled out a little bit. She even had someone come in and change her hair color. She's going to be a stunning blonde. Since she had so much more time to live, she figured she might as well make the most of it. She went outside and got hit by an ice cream truck and died. So she says to God, she says, "What happened? What happened? I'm supposed to have 40 more years." And God said, "I didn't recognize you." I didn't recognize you. And they can do a lot for changing your appearance, right? I know I shouldn't mention this, but when you have larger lips, you notice when some movie star suddenly gets lips that are larger than should fit their face, and you think, this doesn't look right. I know all that stuff is popular in Hollywood, so you get used to seeing it. But at any rate, she changed her appearance too much. But the point I'm going to use that corny story to make is God does know us. Whether you get liposuction, change your hair color, and everything else, facelift, God knows us. He knows us very well. We are his first fruits. Christ was the first of the first fruits. We are the first fruits. God is going to take care of us. We're very important. We're going to be in the vanguard, if you want to call it the leadership group, and many others, of course, that have the small scattered churches converted through the centuries. We're very important to God, and he will give us the help we need. So if you're discouraged about your human nature, usually the things that get us are pride, vanity, lust, and greed. All right, those are big four. My pride is hurt, or my vanity is getting me trying to do something I shouldn't do. Pride, vanity, lust, and greed. Ask God for extra help, and he'll give it to you. Just have faith. We're important to God. And I said this at the feast, and I still believe it. We're more important than we think we are. I know when you say that, people say, yeah, that's as small as we are, that sounds a bit presumptuous, but I still believe it. We're more important than we think we are, and we're important to God. So when you need help, ask God for it. People say, well, what about the verses in the Bible that say, it's an ever-burning hell and that unquenched fire or eternal fire? I want to just look at two of the verses, but there are others that we could look at. But I want to just look at two to make a point. That's not what the Bible means by unquenched fire, unquenchable fire, or eternal fire. Or even the one about the smoke rises up forever and ever. That's more of a metaphorical expression that if you're on ground level and you see a big fire and the smoke goes up, as far as you can see, it never ends. But if we're in some kind of spaceship and you go 40 miles above the earth, you'd probably see where that smoke dissipates in the outer atmosphere. It's more of an expression from the viewpoint of the people on the ground. It does mean that smoke continues for all eternity. Anyway, Jeremiah 17:27. By the way, later in Jeremiah, because the Israelites did not repent, the city of Jerusalem was burned. But I want to just read this statement. You see what the Bible means by unquenchable fire. Jeremiah 17:27. But if you will not heed me to hallow the Sabbath day, such as not carrying a burden when entering the gates of Jerusalem. Apparently what they did in various times, they'd have a wagon load of goods, and they'd bring it into Jerusalem, and they'd open up a bazaar. I call it a bazaar. We might call it outdoor shop. And they would do that on the Sabbath, and God didn't allow that kind of thing. That's what he means, in case that confuses you, and that's what he's talking about. They just didn't want to do what God said. And they did a lot of other bad stuff when you go through the book of Jeremiah. This wasn't the only bad thing, but it's important to God. And people argue about, well, why is one day important to God? Because God said so. He gets to decide right or wrong. I know for us, we say, well, we don't care about any of that. But God cares, so that's what counts. When entering the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I will kindle a fire in its gates, meaning the gates of the city of Jerusalem, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem, and it shall not be quenched. Now, you can go to Jerusalem today. I mean, you can actually buy an airplane ticket out of New York City, and whatever the deal is, you'll be LL Airlines, you'll be in Jerusalem in 15, 20 hours. It's not still burning. Right? And there are some ancient gates that you can see. They preserve what I call the ancient section of Jerusalem. And, it's all kinds of stuff. It's not still burning. So when it said unquenched fire, what did it mean? It simply means, for instance, in the Army they taught us if somebody's on fire, because there are a lot of incendiary weapons, you're supposed to push the guy to the ground and roll him in the dirt until you quench out the fire. You stuff out. Well, obviously, if you have a fire extinguisher, use that. That's what we mean. In other words, if there's a fire and you quench it, you stop it from burning whoever it's burning. Well, what God says is he's going to let the Babylonians set the city of Jerusalem on fire, and it will not be quenched until basically the whole city and its walls were pretty much burned down. And when you read Ezra and Nehemiah, the city is pretty much destroyed. God did not allow the fire to be quenched. It does not mean the fire goes on for thousands of years. It just means it's not put out until it consumes what it's feeding on. Jude 1:7. As Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Now, when you see that, you think, eternal fire. You can go to the Middle East, and they can tell you where the cities of Sodom, there were twin cities, sort of like St. Paul and Minneapolis, or something close to that. They can tell you where the Twin Cities area was. Is it still burning? No. You can go. I mean, you can go to the Middle East, and these archaeologists, they know where all that stuff is. It's close to where the Dead Sea area, but it's not still burning. When it said eternal fire, it meant fire that burned. And so remember, when you read those scriptures, that's just the world, and the world has inherited a lot of this stuff from paganism. The thing that's bad with a hellfire that burns and tortures people forever and ever and ever and ever, the premise behind that is a sadistic God. Now, some of the pagan gods were sadistic and evil, and some of these traditions that the Catholic Church has pushed, and others, really were taken over from paganism, and Dante made his Infernal even worse because he actually hated certain people and he was putting them into hell. He wanted to scare them, as crazy as that sounds. But and of course, we don't believe in a sadistic God. God is kind, and it's just like Jonah said when Nineveh was forgiven. Jonah said, I didn't want to go to Nineveh because they were Israel's enemy and rival. I wanted you to destroy them, but I knew if I warned them, because you're so gracious and kind, you just might forgive them. And sure enough, it happened. He was so sad about that because he knew God was gracious and kind and slow to anger and easy to forgive. So he's not going to torture people forever and ever, but somebody will be tormented forever and ever. And I'll get to that in a minute. But it won't be people. 2 Peter 2:4. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered, and we can think of the Gehenna, a place of restraint with burning fire, deliver them into the chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. Revelation 20:10. The devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone where the beast and the false prophet were. Because being physical, they would just be burned to ashes quickly. But the spirit beings wouldn't be. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Now the devil has us thinking that's our fate, to be tormented forever and ever, but it's really his fate. By the way, think of how cruel that would be. Right now, we've got about 7 billion people on the earth. Any way you slice it, the majority are not Christians. It depends on which group is naming them. But like if you were the Southern Baptists, you'd probably, so everybody except maybe us and a few other groups are all going to be in hell. Or maybe whatever. There'd be at least over 6 billion people assigned when they die to be tortured forever and ever. You see how unreasonable that would make God. And that's not true, by the way. It's not going to happen. God will resurrect them in the future, and most of them will clearly see the true God and his paradise, and they will be converted. And all Israel will be converted. But the demons, and I don't know exactly what the bottomless pit looks like. We don't really get a great description of it. But you look at Revelation 20, and God has angels lock the devil and the demons into this bottomless pit. And they're going to be there, except for a minor release for a short period. They're going to be in there forever and ever. Now, when they say they're tormented, I don't think, even though there's maybe fire at the top of the pit, I don't think it's the fire because they're spirit beings. It's not going to hurt them. I think the torment is mental torment. You know, the devil plotted to take over God's position, and those angels. See, we human beings have an excuse for our evil. We have human nature, and we have the devil's evil influence. I'm not saying that the people who turn really evil and become horrible people that God has to burn up don't deserve it, but at least we don't get tortured forever and ever. They just die and they're gone. But the spirit beings don't have that excuse. And I think life in this planet is tough. This is a tough planet. Bad things happen. We're in a serious business because when the angels revolted against God, then God saw how serious that was, and he wants to build a family, but we get tested first. We've got to prove ourselves. I mean, with his help and his grace. I'm not taking any credit away from God, but we got to be tested first because God isn't going to allow that to happen again. And when those demons are locked up in that bottomless pit, whatever that looks like, and I assume it's dark from the way it's described, they're going to have mental torment. I'm just speculating. They'll be mad at each other. You talked me into this revolt. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. Well, maybe it won't be quite that simplistic. And maybe they'll be able to look through the grates and they'll see all the family members, at least from a distance, that they tried to lure away from God, and they're happy in God's family. And they're going to be mad, and tormented, but they deserve it. And by the way, the ever-burning hell has another problem. It would be rewarding Satan for luring people away from God. In other words, the way Dante described it, and the way the big church has it,